Mayhem on VH1.
How would you describe a perfect metal rhythm?
The rhythm of metal is a riff. That's why I love metal. The riffs get you crazy. That's metal for me.
Metal appeals to your balls.
This one's called Hellbent for Leather.
It just sounded more evil.
Heavy metal thunder, baby.
A lot of the stuff that came out of England was metal's answer to punk.
The new wave of British heavy metal absolutely blew me into next week.
Oh, there's Eddie.
It was overseas. It was the English hard rock.
Do you want to play your music loud or do you want to play it loud? All that stuff just jumps out and just goes bam right in your nuts.
Stay tuned for details.
It's hard to believe now, with hundreds of millions of records sold over the past 3 decades, but in the late 70s, heavy metal was on its deathbed. The roadmap that Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin created had taken an abrupt detour. Disco had become the dance of the people, and in the UK, metal's birthplace, a growing unrest sparked a youth movement that put heavy metal on the fringes of extinction.
Metal almost fizzled out, around the punk new wave era.
Punk was really an answer to like the dinosaur rock of the 70s. There was no new ideas, there was no new energy. It was almost becoming kind of a parody of itself.
Zeppelin would be doing these 20-minute drum solos and it got really yawningly boring.
It got very technical. The punk thing, I said to hell with that. We just want to go in a garage, pick up a guitar, make some noise.
To a large part, it destroyed heavy metal in the UK. Ultimately, I think it kind of forced it to recreate itself.
In search of a savior, metal found one in the same factory town of Birmingham, England that produced Black Sabbath. They were 5 guys with one name, Judas Priest.
I was completely wasted, out of work and down.
In musical terms, obviously we wanted to do something unique. You had to kind of chisel out your own sort of image and sound.
Priest used to rehearse in the same studios that Sabbath used to work in. We knew that in this room, Iommi had been riffing up and Ozzy had been screaming. You could still smell that they'd been there last week. The roots of metal are very definitely within Priest and Sabbath.
Much as Sabbath started it, Priest were the ones that took it out of the blues and just straight into metal. They were the first ones that were all metal all the time.
Up here in space, looking down on you. My life is trace, everything you do.
When you go back and listen to some of those early Zeppelin records, they would have bluegrass songs on the record or madrigal tunes. And Judas Priest just said, yeah, that's not heavy. Judas Priest was the first band to take the heavy metal and embrace it as a term and as a music form. We're metal gods.
Originally formed in 1970, it took Priest a few years to hone their signature sound, but the result was something fresh. An energy fueled by the twin guitar leads of Glenn Tipton and K.K. Downing, and the hard-edged vocals of singer Rob Halford.
The riffs had that same inherent darkness that Sabbath had, but it just sounded more metallic. And then on top of that, you had Halford's vocals.
Everything Halford sang, you believe every word of it. Hell bent for leather. I'm like going, damn straight. You're right. Whatever you're saying, you're right.
But what truly set them apart was a fashion statement, a simple look that matched the power of their music.
One of the cool things about Priest is that we're commonly known as being the originators of the look, the image.
When Judas Priest came along, it took them a while to find their niche. In their early days, they were wearing very flowery, almost hippified clothes.
And now back to Judas Priest, and this is Dreamer Deceiver.
I remember seeing them on a British program called The Old Grey Whistle Test, when they were actually very serious, kind of studious musicians. They had none of the whips, leather and chains image that we saw today. Guitarist KK Downing was quite flamboyant, used to wear this big cowboy hat. The singer Rob Halford was in these very flouncy blouses.
We had all this great sound, we had the show, we had the lights, we had all of these great things going on, but there was just something not connecting from the visual perspective. And it was around the time that we brought Hellbent for Leather into the set list. And it was just a great epiphany.
We never sat down and said, let's all wear leather. We fell into it. I think Rob was the first, and then gradually we all started to wear the leather, and it just seemed so right.
The look, the leather and the spikes, which of course, you know, basically came out of Halford's, the way he dressed because he was gay, which I love.
I have been known to go into one or two S&M shops in my life. And this is only because when we were thinking about this, I had no idea where to go. You know, we didn't have people that made clothes for us. So I would just walk around London looking for alleyways and obscure little doorways and find these places and just go in there and then I'll have one of those and two of those and three of those. Mr. S. Leather of Soho, London is the place to go to.
He wanted something that looked extreme. He wanted it to be like a perfect manifestation of what the music was. I mean, we'd wear like black leather jackets and stuff like he wore. We didn't think we were doing anything remotely gay at all. But that's where it came from, and how many bands looked like that after that.
And within a short time, I think a lot of other metal bands were going, yeah, look, that's the way we should look too. And so it became a kind of a uniform, a recognition. If you looked at a band's photo, you knew they were metal because of all this, you know, and the chains and the studs, and that's a metal band.
Armed with an aggressive look and sound, Judas Priest was poised to break out, but progress was slow. In the UK, they were an underground success at best, and when they first toured the States in 1977, they opened for REO Speedwagon. But everything changed with their 1980 release, British Steel. The album cracked into the British top 10, and more importantly, got airplay on American radio stations. Suddenly, legions of new fans were ready to embrace Judas Priest and heavy metal.
Judas Priest is number one!
Oh, I remember going to the Starwood and Judas Priest was in town. It was like, dude, the Priest is here.
Priest is the best, man. Priest is the best, I'm telling you. Hey, let me tell you, Rob Halford is the best tango around.
I went to see Judas Priest, and I got to wear the arm gauntlets, everything, the spikes, and it was raw and it was real, and you could relate to it.
Heavy metal rules. All that punk sucks. It doesn't belong in this world. It belongs on Mars, man. What the hell is punk?
Priest, 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 priest.
We've always maintained we're a heavy metal band, even during the time periods when metal was supposed to be unfashionable and people were trying to get rid of the tag. We were proud to be heavy metal.
We knew we'd established the craziest place on God's earth for rock and roll. I promise you nothing but severe pain of the ear, and I will melt you if you've got the balls to come and see us.
For all of Judas Priest's success, much of their acclaim was achieved in the United States. Back in London, the heavy metal scene continued to lurk in the shadows.
There were loads of metal fans in Britain who felt disenfranchised. He had magazines writing about punk and new wave, didn't want to know about the old school, and Priest, Motorhead, AC/DC were largely included by so many people in the media as old school. Suddenly the underground scene, word of mouth, became all important. And it was at this time that the Bandwagon, the heavy metal Soundhouse in northwest London, came into its own because a guy there called Neil Kay stuck to his guns.
The Bandwagon was a very big pub, and Neil Kay set up a metal DJ night, and he called it Neil Kay's Heavy Metal Soundhouse.
The manager of the pub said to me, "Why don't you play some punk?" But I can't tell you what I told him, except it started in F and finished at F.
In my view, nobody should be allowed to stand on a stage unless they can actually present the total professional thing, unless they really can sing and really can play. Punk was a total anti-attitude towards music.
There was a music magazine called Sounds that I had noticed following the progression of rock. I was reading through it one day and I thought, we need some publicity, this is desperate. So I phoned up Sounds and I talked to Jeff Barton. And I said, I have got a heavy metal discotheque. We call it a Soundhouse because the word discotheque sucks. Get your butt down here. I promise you nothing but severe pain of the ear, and I will melt you if you've got the balls to come and see us.
Hard rock, heavy metal, heavy rock, whatever you want to call it, was my favourite form of music. And I just thought it needed somebody to speak out about it.
He did a double-page expose right in the centre of Sounds the next week. All hell broke loose. It was as if the floodgates had opened. We went up from about 300 to about 750, 800. There was no room for half of them. They were all outside on the roundabout, on the green, everywhere.
He had kids in denim jackets full of patches, T-shirts that went from Motorhead to Judas Priest to AC/DC.
You kind of felt part of a community. You felt very, very special. It was also blessed relief after being bombarded here, there and everywhere by other forms of music that you didn't really like.
We knew we'd established the craziest place on God's earth for rock and roll.
You had these weird, crazy things happening. People would turn out and they weren't just playing air guitar, they'd play cardboard guitar. They'd lovingly craft their own instruments. It became a scene within a scene.
Rob Halford. He invented the air guitar probably back about 1976.
Rob Halford was a regular patron of the Bandwagon in Kingsbury. Mad as a hatter. Absolutely mad as a hatter. Just an incredible character.
The cardboard guitar syndrome, or sorry Rob, hardboard guitar, he objected to the word cardboard, started one evening back then when the customary amount of head banging was going on, as it always did. Rob shoved his way forward. The next thing I see is this tall bloke, thin with a beard, and he's standing there with a hardboard guitar. And he's using it, and he's looking so good. I really believe he's playing it.
The great thing was they weren't taking the piss. They were doing it because they loved it.
The next weekend, there was 10 of them. The next weekend, there was 15. Then there was 20. There was no other club like it in the country. And people came from far and wide to see this phenomenon.
Our guitar player, Randy Rhoads, left Quiet Riot to join up with Ozzy Osbourne, and he used to give me phone calls when they were recording those albums and said, "You're not going to believe what's going on over here." The kids in the audience come with cardboard cutouts of a mock-up of the guitar players, kind of guitars they use. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, like, for example, if you were to see Judas Priest, they'd have a flying V, a cardboard flying V like KK Downing would have."
Neil Kay played what the fans wanted to hear. And if you were a metal band with any hope at all, getting your demo played at the Soundhouse meant everything.
Jeff Barton took my weekly request chart. He published it in Sounds and it went worldwide. That really opened the door. Demo tapes started pouring in from everywhere. Steve Harris, Dave Murray, they came in one night from East London. I'd never even heard of them. "Here's our new demo tape, mate. Do me a favour and listen to it, will you?" And I took it home after the Wagon that night, and I put it on my cassette deck, and I started getting all these goosebumps all over my arms.
They just went through the roof. He just was like blown away by this piece of music.
I listened to it, and I listened to it, and it was the best I'd ever heard.
Neil Kay started to play it. People at the Bandwagon were listening to it and, "Wow, this is amazing. This is great. This is a demo? Surely not." These were songs that you could headbang to, you could wave your fist to.
That was Iron Maiden's demo tape.
Where I first saw Iron Maiden, I thought, this is just fierce. I looked at the singer and I thought, I reckon I could do a better job than him, though, you know. I mean, I should be singing for those guys.
Keep watching more Metal Month on VH1.
The Bandwagon Club in northwest London became the spiritual epicenter of heavy metal's rising underground. And by the dawn of the 80s, new bands, thriving on speed, power, and volume, were poised to usher in a new era.
The new wave of British heavy metal was just really a term we invented in the office one afternoon. There were a lot of young, exciting British rock bands coming out of the woodwork, coming out of the metal work, if you like. What I didn't realise at the time was how many of them there were.
There was Samson,
Savage, Diamond Head,
Venom,
Angel Witch,
Saxon, Fist,
Tank,
Girl School, the Tigers of Pantang.
But only a few lasted a few years and had a career out of it.
A lot of those bands really didn't make much of a dent over here. Pretty much it was Iron Maiden and Iron Maiden and Iron Maiden.
Thanks to their legendary demo tape, Iron Maiden quickly developed a loyal following and a reputation as a band of the people.
They were guys who had all honed their chops in bar bands. They knew how to play their instruments really well. They were actually offered a record deal in '76 if they'd shave their heads into mohawks and play punk music. Well, they stuck it out in the London club scene for a few years, said, I think we've got a good thing going. We're going to stick with the Iron Maiden plan. See you in 5 years.
Iron Maiden waited patiently until they received a record deal that allowed them to keep their image. Ironically, when they released their self-titled first album in 1980, both critics and fans immediately saw a connection between Maiden and the punk elements they spurned.
More than any band at that particular time, they had a little bit of grudging respect from punk writers of that generation, particularly with the singer Paul Di'Anno in the lineup. They had this kind of punk metal edge that I think crossed over to a large extent.
They wrote these songs that were really complicated, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, prog rock, or Genesis. And then they had the energy of punk. So while punk bands were a lot of times just really playing three chords really fast, Iron Maiden was playing this intricate spider-webby guitar lines, and it sounded like classical music.
Like, there's a lot of that in there. It's very noodly.
It sounded more aggressive and more confrontational than pop music did. And if you were a very mainstream, straightforward, good person, you would not want to listen to Iron Maiden.
The timing couldn't have been more perfect when they hit. The genre as a whole was starting to happen, and here comes Maiden. I was like, I've never heard this before. This is eviler than Priest. Like, that was my first thoughts hearing Iron Maiden. They're Judas Priest, but more evil. I was like, how'd they do this? How did they do this?
By 1982, Maiden had 2 records under their belt and a groundswell of support from enthusiastic metal fans the world over. However, as their popularity grew, the band was looking into their future, well beyond the limitations of their singer, Paul Di'Anno.
Di'Anno was very much a punk frontman. He wasn't a great singer, but he was right for what the first 2 albums represented. But with Paul Di'Anno, they were going to be stuck. He was unpredictable and enigmatic in a way that was not acceptable. To move on, they needed a new singer.
When I first saw Iron Maiden, I thought, this is just fierce. God, this is good. Wow. I looked at the singer and I thought, I reckon I could do a better job than him, though, you know. I mean, I should be singing for those guys.
I left alone. My mind was blank.
They got him, Bruce Dickinson, from Sanson, a band who really weren't going anywhere.
What did I see?
Well, Bruce had a great voice, great range.
Can I believe?
He was more articulate, more dynamic, more diverse, a better lyricist and a better singer than Paul Di'Anno. It allowed Maiden to move to the next level.
Once you bring Bruce Dickinson into the lineup, you can see that transformation from a band who can get a club going, can get a 3,000 or 4,000 seater venue going. But with Dickinson on board, you know, you're talking about, you know, arena rock at its greatest.
Metal is vaudeville in a way. The story, the theatre in your head, it takes over. As soon as you go on a stage, you can't be a little pinhead, so you have to blow yourself up. But if you want to be that big to somebody who's right at the back of the arena, you've got to take a real... and you inflate your ego to supersized proportions. It's supersize me, and everything is big, and you don't make a gesture like that, nobody will see it. Arms get flung, grand gestures, and the person at the back feels like you're much closer.
With Dickinson up front, Iron Maiden had the larger-than-life persona that the band had always envisioned. But there was one element unique to Maiden that was more famous than any single member of the band. He played no instrument, and he couldn't sing. Yet Eddie became completely responsible for projecting the band's image and became one of heavy metal's most enduring symbols.
Eddie was the original alter ego that could express humor and irony and aggression.
They put all their fantasy, as it were, all their image into Eddie. He became the personification of Iron Maiden on T-shirts, on photographs, on album sleeves, on single sleeves.
What you've got to realise is Eddie basically started out as just a head, you know, as a cardboard cutout on a piece of plywood.
It was more like a kabuki kind of mask and was shaped to look a little bit grotesque. And I remember seeing that behind the drummer. We'd do the set, and at the end of it, he had some fake blood gushing out in the mask, and it actually went all over the drummer's head. He was just covered in this red stuff.
The original Eddie didn't have long hair. They had to give him some hair so he looked like a proper headbanger.
What was the inspiration for this album?
Eddie. I might have never gotten into Maiden if I didn't see Eddie on the cover of that first album, and I looked at it and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Just shows you how important artwork was and is to music.
I just love the fact that we didn't know what he is. Was he a corpse? Was he a monster? Was he an alien? Because every record, he changed to whatever the theme of the record was. Killers, he's killing someone. Peace of Mind, he's in a straitjacket. Power Slave, he's in ancient Egypt. And then on top of that, when Maiden's playing, maybe if the energy level isn't as high, boom, they bring out the giant Eddie to come on stage, and everyone's like, oh, there's Eddie.
There was something about the image. It was almost like World Federation Wrestling. It was that kind of larger-than-life escapism thing, and slightly ridiculous. And I think that's why a lot of young kids got into it.
By owning Iron Maiden, you knew you were consuming this art and this aesthetic that belonged to sort of a darker subculture. And that was very appealing. It seemed to say, you know, you think you're alienated, but you're not. There's 2 million people exactly like you.
Iron Maiden grabbed everyone between the ages of 14 and 22 at that time by the balls and didn't let go.
I was like, what, 13 years old, 14 years old. I used to sell Quaaludes at the Starwood, and I saw this band Van Halen play, and I was just like, wow.
If you want to talk about the strip and creating rock and roll, nobody can recreate what they did.
Any band is always influenced by their environment, wherever they come from. Black Sabbath were from Birmingham, very dour, low-key, very working-class oriented, and it certainly shows in their music and their approach and attitude to life. But California, Hollywood, is glitz, glamour, glitter.
5,000 miles and a continent away from the land where metal was forged, there was an uprising of a different sort taking place. And unlike the gritty industrial vibe of England, the new scene was drenched in sunshine.
You can't get much more opposite than Birmingham, England, and Los Angeles Sunset Strip. You know, the bright colors and the spandex and the shoes and the boots and the girls.
Up to that point, heavy metal was very much about men. It was macho. It was standing on stage and being very forceful. Now suddenly it was cool to be a character again. Suddenly it was cool to be a little trashy, a little sleazy, a little sexy, as it were.
And that's what happened with heavy metal groups in Los Angeles. They took the essence of the music, but they glamified it.
Before people used the term hair metal, I remember they used to use a term called teeth metal. These are bands who smile. Van Halen created it. This was heavy music, but like the singer likes to be there.
I love talking. I love telling jokes. For me, this is just one big wet t-shirt contest, you know?
They just kind of summed up everything about the California lifestyle. They didn't go in for the trappings, you know, the witches and the mysticism in the woods. It's all about chicks and cars and good times. And they really Americanized heavy metal.
Van Halen came together in 1974 and spent the next 3 years honing their chops on the LA club scene.
If you want to talk about the strip and creating rock and roll in LA, nobody can recreate what they did.
I was like, what, 13 years old, 14 years old. I used to sell Quaaludes at the Starwood, and I saw this band Van Halen play, and I was just like, wow.
I used to go to see him at the Whiskey. I swear to God, I used to sit on the stage, and here'd be Van Halen flying all over the place like it was an arena, and there'd be 12 people there. I said to my guys, there's something new going down, and sure enough, Van Halen erupted.
In 1978, Van Halen released their self-titled debut. Chock full of radio-friendly hits, the album went platinum 6 times over.
When Van Halen 1 came out, everyone in Britain just picked up on it and said, have you heard this album? It's so different. It's so exciting. It's so fresh. It's so not British.
If there is any design to it at all, the sound of Van Halen is meant to spill over all over your turntable and ruin the rest of your records.
When Van Halen 1 came out, it revolutionized guitar playing. Eddie played with a style that nobody before him ever had played.
Anybody who just listens to the beginning of Eruption, just the beginning, even if you're not a guitar player, the way that hits you. All that stuff just jumps out and just goes kabam right in your nuts.
Every guitar player that came out from that point on, no pun intended, tapped into the Eddie Van Halen style.
With flash, flair, and sex appeal, Van Halen's popularity soared worldwide. They were taking heavy metal on a new ride and everyone was invited, especially women.
When Van Halen came over to the UK, they supported Black Sabbath on Black Sabbath's 10th anniversary tour. Now, can you imagine that? Sabbath, heavy metal gods, supported by these upstarts from America. Well, what's going to happen? Well, obviously, these upstarts from America are going to get no chance. In fact, it was Sabbath who had no chance. Every night on that tour, Black Sabbath were blown off by Van Halen. It was Eddie Van Halen playing out of his skin, and David Lee Roth all over the place, like a mesmerizing figure.
Nobody has seen a frontman like Roth before. Roth's showmanship influenced a whole new generation of frontmen.
He's like a Liberace of rock and roll.
David Lee Roth wanted to appeal to the girls as much as the boys, and people loved him for it.
What you see on stage with Van Halen is only what you're going to find underneath the stage. And what you see backstage is probably what you're going to find upstairs in the hotel.
They were completely populist. Van Halen was for everybody. To say you like Van Halen, I mean, that's like saying you like pro football. It was the widest possible net for a rock band to have.
Van Halen had made heavy metal more popular than ever before. Once left for dead by critics like Lester Bangs, the scene was now thriving, and so was the music. The band's third offering, Women and Children First, came out in 1980. It would prove to be metal's golden year.
1980 was magical. It's a magical year in the history of metal.
There was a lot of goodwill for this kind of music around at that time.
Punk played itself out, and heavy metal, meanwhile, coalesced into something modern and important at that moment.
This was the year that a lot of awesome albums came out.
Judas Priest put out British Steel.
Lightning to the Nations by Diamond Head.
AC/DC did Back in Black.
Motorhead put out Ace of Spades, which was a huge deal.
Saxon's Wheels of Steel.
Great albums. Ozzy did Blizzard of Oz and discovered Randy Rhoads. So much happened in that year. And for so many bands, it was time to make their mark.
This was literally the case for former Rainbow frontman Ronnie James Dio. Playing follow-up to Ozzy Osbourne in metal's premier rock band was reason enough to create his own identity. Little did he know that his signature gesture would come to define metal like nothing else.
I joined a band that had a singer who did this all the time, who thought he was Richard Nixon. I didn't want to be Richard Nixon, or did I want to be Ozzy? I didn't want to be that. I wanted to do something that was special to me. All respect.
I call it the universal metal sign.
Well, my grandmother used to do it. She's born in Italy and didn't speak a lot of English and had her superstitions. So she stopped the evil eye. I got it. Or you can give the evil eye that way, too. You can do it. It's an antenna, both ways. Works both ways. And I see her do it all the time. It's called the Moloch, as M-O-L-O-C-H, which is the devil.
I think it's been glorified over the years into this evil, satanic sign. I mean, I remember even in the decline of the Western civilization, some lady was saying it's 666. There's a 6 here, there's a 6 here.
And a 6 here, which represents the 666 in the book of Revelations in the Bible.
It's like, come on, man. I think this means I love you in sign language.
It's not just that. I mean, I found all different kind of ways to do it, to create letters with it, to do all kinds of amazing things with it.
You got the single, which is this, and you got the double, and then you got too much metal for one hand, you know?
It's like, for instance, when you say the word Slayer, when people would go up to me and they say, dude, you should play more Slayer, they never said that. They would always say, dude, play more Slayer!
But you know, it was meant for a purpose. I tried to create it within the confines of the band Black Sabbath, in the evilness that was supposed to be that band. And now it's crossed over into everything.
By 1981, metal had morphed into a growing community with its own distinctive identity. Dio had given it a greeting, Priest a look, Maiden a mascot. Metal even had its own dance, the headbang. When Van Halen not only turned it into a party, but invited girls to come along, metal was well positioned for the revolution that was about to take place.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
We're Def Leppard. There's only one way to hear us right on MTV, in stereo. Stay tuned for details.
MTV came out, we embraced it fully. We said, no, we're more Duran Duran than we are Black Sabbath.
I know bands, all they wanted to do was get a video on MTV.
I wanna touch you.
Heavy metal never got the respect it deserves. It's probably what makes it so near and dear to the people who love it.
The story of metal continues tonight at 9. Part of Metal Month, only on VH1.
The explosion of heavy metal really did have a lot to do with the advent of videos on television. Heavy metal was a natural fit for rock video because of its emphasis on the visual.
MTV first hit the airwaves August 1st in 1981.
I'm Mark Goodman.
I'm Alan Hunter.
I'm Martha Quinn.
I'm J.J. Jackson.
I'm Nina Blackwood.
MTV was the national radio station. I mean, people tuned in to MTV to see the new bands.
Here you had a visual medium that was looking for something to put on the screen. And Supertramp and Joe Jackson just weren't doing it. Matter of fact, that was the end of their careers. People got to look at them and said, oh my God, put the camera back on Joe Jackson's shoes.
Walk up the moon.
We were giving a show and visually driven without the video cameras on. So MTV said, well, this is ready-made.
I would say the first band that got airplay on MTV that really broke out, that is considered in the quote-unquote heavy metal genre, would be Def Leppard.
MTV Def Leppard interview, 22/12, 1982.
Following the footsteps of Iron Maiden, Def Leppard was the next big act in the new wave of British heavy metal. But they also had the flair and good looks of Van Halen. It was the perfect combination for the fledgling MTV.
We weren't like Black Sabbath or Maiden. We felt it was more like, say, AC/DC, or even more like the Stones. Nothing to do with metal at all, really, except the fact that we played loud electric guitars. You know, MTV came out, we embraced it fully. I know there were some bands that go, oh no, we're radio bands and we're going to stick to our cause. We said, no, we're more Duran Duran than we are Black Sabbath.
1981's High and Dry was Leppard's first stab at a more mainstream sound, which they gained by leaving their Sheffield, England home and starting a collaboration with AC/DC producer Mutt Lange, who had even bigger ideas for the band's next album.
Mutt Lange, who was our producer, said we should make an album that does open doors and that is different.
We had a piece of paper stuck on the wall in the studio and everybody wrote down titles. Occasionally we got a couple of serious ones.
We were trying to make something that was like Star Wars for the ears, you know. Mutt being the musical equivalent of Steven Spielberg. That's basically what we did.
Pyromania was one of the serious ones, and everybody seemed to like it. And he did have a good image. It's a great word. I mean, I didn't even know what it meant when I first read it. I do now.
Pyromania was one of the first pop metal records, which had more of a melodic pop sensibility. Like, I remember the song that came out right before Pyromania, and it was just Joe Elliott walking around a house going, me and my wine! I'm doing fine! Just me and my wine! And then the next thing was Photograph.
Photograph came out, MTV started playing it, and it just went through the roof. There
were certainly being marketed as kind of like the young, pretty boys from England, and it wasn't all about denim and leather. It was a little lighter than that.
Just before that tour kicked off, Joe and Rick went down Kensington Market, and Rick Allen bought these little shorts with a Union Jack on. Joe bought this T-shirt. During the Pyromania tour, we ended up selling the T-shirts because it became such a popular thing, the Union Jack.
Yes, they were good looking. Yes, they looked fantastic in those little British flag shorts. The stars were in alignment, but we wouldn't be talking about them now if they looked good and they had good videos and the songs were lame.
It was just amazing the way the stuff sounded. It was like just so polished. The records up to that point didn't have that finesse. Just hook after hook after hook. You know, you had a guitar hook. The melody and the verse is a hook, and the B section's a hook, and the chorus is like, oh my God, okay, God, pull these hooks out of me. There was metal fans that would buy about 2 million albums, and it was basically like an Aussie audience, and that was kind of hard rock. And if you crossed over into pop, which is what we did, that's when the humongous record sales started coming in. We actually went top 40. It wasn't just rock. It was rock plus.
Def Leppard's success raised the bar. Pyromania was the second best-selling album for all of 1983, behind only Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Pyromania helped to define the 1980s, possibly like no other album.
I think a lot of bands saw Def Leppard and the formula they had of making these music videos, starting to incorporate some conceptual elements into them and tried to emulate that template. You know, you look at someone like Ozzy, and here's the Prince of Darkness running around in sequins and eyeliner and hair poofed out to here. Judas Priest started putting color in their black leather.
A lot of the bands took their influence from other classic, heavy, really heavy metal bands and then lightened it up for commerciality, for MTV. That's all they wanted to do, was get a video on MTV.
It had only been a few short years since critics predicted metal's fateful demise. But as the 80s took flight, that was a thing of the past. Thanks to heavy rotation on MTV, heavy metal was not only alive and well, it was ready to take over the world.
We've been told countless times that this music is dead and over. And it's a constant quest to prove that's not true. It's always going to be there at a certain level, but it's never going to be dead. Never.
They rock the world, and the time has come to give back. It's the first annual VH1 Rock Honors, with headline performances by honorees Kiss, Queen, Def Leppard, and Judas Priest, with special performances by Foo Fighters, the All-American Rejects, Godsmack, Tommy Lee, Slash, Rob Zombie, Scott Ian, and Paul Rogers. Hosted by Jamie Presley. VH1 Rock Honors. Rock, and you shall receive. Premieres next Wednesday at 9.